gonna read and we're gonna talk. We're gonna learn and it's gonna rock. We're gonna answer 3 questions, it's a walk in the park. It's Mr. Clark's Corner, now here's Mr. Clark.
Hi, welcome to Mr. Clark's Corner. Let me ask you a question. What is a librarian's favorite Christmas song? Well, it's obviously Silent Night. All right, one more for you. What did Adam say on the day before Christmas? Merry Christmas, Eve. Because of Adam and Eve. Oh, man. But Adam and Eve was at the very beginning of the Bible. And now let's get into the very beginning of the new part of the Bible, what we call the New Testament. And the first thing that happens in there is the story of Jesus' birth. And that's what we celebrate at Christmas. That's why I'm wearing my Spurs Santa hat, because it's Christmas time and that's as Christmassy as I could get. But it is Christmas time, and so that means we're talking about the birth of Jesus. And that's what we talked about on Sunday morning. But on Sunday morning, we kind of talked about a little bit of everything. We talked about the actual birth of Jesus. We talked about the wise men coming and visiting Jesus. We talked about the shepherds coming and visiting Jesus. And really, the shepherds and wise men were never mentioned together in the same book. They were in different books in the Bible, and they were never together by the same story. So let me go ahead and ask you, what is your favorite part of the Christmas story? There are lots of parts of the Christmas story that could be our favorites. But let me tell you one of my favorites. One of my favorite parts of the Christmas story is that Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem because they had to be counted. See, there was a decree that everyone had to go to the hometown from where their ancestors were from so that they could count how many people were in the kingdom. And so Joseph and Mary got to Bethlehem, and Mary was very pregnant. She was getting ready to give birth, and they checked everywhere. They went from door to door asking if anybody had an extra room they could stay in. But because everybody was traveling and everybody was going back to Bethlehem, there was no room for them to stay. So the only place they could find was a stable. A stable where dirty, smelly animals are. Nasty, disgusting place. Maybe it had a little bit of a roof and maybe it didn't. But they didn't find anywhere. And so Jesus, who is God's Son, who's coming into the earth, his very first experience of being on this earth by himself without being in Mary's womb was, he's not welcome, there's no room for him. But it didn't stop Jesus. Actually, let's read a little bit about that in Luke chapter 2. And this Sunday, we're going to be reading in Luke chapter 2 as well, as we have all of our kids in a combined family Sunday service in the worship center. Let's go ahead and read the first few verses of Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, verse 1, and I'll stop us when we're there. In those days, Caesar Augustus made a law. It required that a list be made of everyone in the Roman world. It was the first time a list was made of the people while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their hometowns to be listed, right? Like I said, everyone had to be counted, so they went back to where they were from. Joseph went also. He went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea. That is where Bethlehem, the town of David, was. Joseph went there because he belonged to the family line of David. He went there with Mary to be listed. Mary was engaged to him and she was expecting a baby. While Joseph and Mary were there, the time came for the child to be born. She gave birth to her first baby. It was a boy. She wrapped him in large strips of cloth. Then she placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. There was no room for Jesus. No room. Like, how can you say there's no room for the Savior of the world? Well, of course, no one knew it was the Savior of the world. But still, there was a pregnant woman about to give birth and no one had any room for her to have shelter. And it's just crazy to me that Jesus lived his whole life being rejected by people. Yes, he had disciples. Yes, he had a big following. But Jesus also had those who rejected him time after time. But Jesus never stopped loving them. Jesus never stopped giving to them. Jesus never stopped performing miracles for them. Jesus never stopped believing in them and giving them a chance to live with him forever. You see, Jesus Even though he was rejected, even from the time of his birth, all the way into the time he was really rejected when he was crucified, Jesus still loved, Jesus still gave, Jesus still served everyone. And if we're to love like Jesus and be like Jesus, that's what we have to do. We're not always going to be accepted. We're not always going to get everything we want. Not everyone is going to love us all the time. But that shouldn't stop us from loving everyone as Jesus did. That sound is the sound of our code word, and our code word for today is David. D-A-V-I-D, David. Write it down on a code word, put it in the mailbox outside of my office. It's David because the city of David was Bethlehem. So that's our correlation there. Well, that brings us to today's 3 questions. Question number 1. Do you think you would have let Mary and Joseph stay with you in your house? Question number 2. What do you think Mary thought when she couldn't find anywhere except a stable to give birth to the Savior? Question number 3. How would you have praised the baby Jesus? Well, that's it. I'm Mr. Clark. This is my corner. You guys have a Merry Christmas next Tuesday. Adios, amigos.
Okay, we read, alright, we talked. Oh, yes, we learned, and you know we rocked. We even answered 3 questions, man, what a fun day. It's Mr. Clark's Corner, I'll see you on Sunday.